Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. This is Q&A session 15 and it is our 150th episode. We can't tell you how much it means to have you all listening to us and leaving us such great reviews. It really is an honor and it keeps us motivated to keep making podcast articles, videos, and courses for years to come. And one of our favorite ways we like to say thank you for all your support is by answering your questions. So we'll be doing just that today with Eric Helms and Jeff Alberts. All 5 of the questions from this episode came from the case study Q&A page on our website, which you can always find and submit your own questions at 3dmusclejourney.com/QA. It's a form we created on our website a couple years ago to get more detailed questions from our audience, and you'll see why that's important throughout this episode. The context provided really enables us to spend time diving into the coaches' brains on what they consider when solving these problems with their own clients and athletes, and we really, really appreciate it. So, topics covered in this episode will include continuous off-season hunger, getting out of the diet bulk cycle, post-contest recovery, training with resistance bands, how and when to use BFR and Myo-reps, powerlifting training without a barbell, returning to the gym after the pandemic, the effect of cardio on resistance training, strategies for self-proclaimed hardgainers, volume increases throughout a lifting career, and much, much more. All of that within 5 questions. So we really get into each one specifically. First one's really long, but it is so important. We see it so often. You'll hear us say that a billion times. So I really hope you guys stick around through the entirety. As always, if you have any feedback or comments on this particular episode, go to 3dmusclejourney.com or to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/team3dmj and leave it under podcast number 150. Let's go ahead and get into it. Here is Q&A session 15 with Jeff Alberts and Eric Helms. Question number 1. All right, so the TLDR is, why am I hungry all the time? It seems that no matter how much or what I eat, I get hungry again within 1 to 2 hours of eating. The only time that I can go 3 or more hours without feeling hungry is if I eat a big-ass meal from a restaurant, like a burger, fries, and a beer, which of course I only do once in a great while. But this means that when I follow my hunger cues, I would be getting fat. Can you point me in any type of direction as to what's going on with me? So that's the end of the question. But I feel like because we have this fancy case study Q&A form and people can leave us a little more backstory, I'd like to provide that. So this particular female, little history of her personal circumstances. I've always had a decent sized appetite. I went into a 16-week bikini prep in 2018 where I lost a total of 31 pounds. Took a 10-month off season where I gained 20 pounds. Then in my next 16-week comp prep, I lost 25 pounds. Now it's 4 months into my off season and I have gained those 25 pounds back. And that's it. JK, I'm going to give y'all one little piece of info. She has no history of large weight fluctuations of dieting until this 2018 prep. Yeah. Hovered between 135 and 145 for like 10 years or so before that. Did resistance training and CrossFit and bro split. So she's got plenty of experience the last 6 years. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over with the TLDR reminder. Why am I hungry all the time?
And so she's done 2 preps and is now in an off season in 2020. Does it say when those preps were?
No, but this started in 2018. So 16 weeks plus 20 weeks plus 16 weeks. And then since then.
So basically we're looking at a 2018 prep, a 2019 prep, and now a 2020 off season, most likely.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, or possibly,
yeah,
like preps that extended across year, but even a shorter time frame, but not longer.
Yeah, and let's assume that because that's a really common scenario, right, for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the background is we've got someone who's done 2 back-to-back years, is now into an off season. A lot of experience lifting weights, no issue with food or weight fluctuations previously, but is now experiencing it post-competition. So my first thought, Andrea, that sounds similar to maybe your experience with the sport. Would you say that's accurate?
I would say that sounds really pretty much exactly like my first 4 years. I don't want to say 4, 3 years in bodybuilding. Yeah, and she's about 3 years in it too. I'd say figure competitions if that matters. But it's pretty similar to mine. And as I now know from the year and a half that I did coach at 3D, that is far more common than I ever thought. And I felt very lonely during that time or whatever. But Jeff and I have talked about that as kind of the W, the yo-yo that happens to many people the first half decade or whatever. So Jeff, how common do you think that scenario is?
I think it's real common, and I think I've experienced it myself personally over the course of many preps where I've kind of went up and down in weight quite drastically. And even right now, I'm up 28 pounds, and it's been about 4 or 5 months since my last show, and I can still eat without feeling full, which is crazy. I can just eat and eat and eat and eat. So it's almost like I have to have some type of self-control and awareness to actually stop myself. And I think, well, for me personally, it's more emotional than it is physical hunger. So I'm not sure if this person is maybe experiencing a little of that, possibly. It's hard to say. But but that's kind of more or less what I've seen on me personally. But with athletes that I've coached, yeah, it's pretty common that after you go through 1 or 2 seasons, especially if the weight is up and down quite drastically, that it's very hard to control the eating behaviors and things like that after a prep is over with.
Can we talk about why? Yeah, Eric, can you give me a quick rundown of what happens in the body that leaves, when we say pretty quickly, some people might hear 16 weeks, 20 weeks, 16, that sounds like a lot of time. That's months. But it's not a lot of time. Can you explain why?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a study that not too long ago, 2017, came out, lead author Holmi, that was out of Finland, where they looked at a decently sized group of female competitors across a spectrum of divisions, natural, and they dieted down, the length of their prep, and then they tracked their recovery for multiple months, and it took about 3 to 4 months before they were up at baseline or approaching baseline values in most cases. So it is actually very normal for maybe 50% of the time you spent dieting for it to take, or longer, for everything to be fully back to normal. And that is the physiological side of it. If we take hunger hormone measurements like ghrelin, leptin, insulin levels, etc., stuff like that. And I think it's important to note that there are also typically psychological changes and behavioral changes as a result of prep. The way you view food changes. You start to rely less and less on your internal cues like hunger and satiety and stuff like that, and more on tracking. And your primary relationship with hunger is trying to suppress it, ignore it, forget about it, or accept it, rather than what you probably did before you ever got into competing was get hungry and eat. So I will say that there's typically, although I would say it's changing more and more as our society becomes less different between men and women, there tends to be a slightly different experience pattern in men and women who get into the sport. So for my generation and Jeff's generation of dudes, we typically, our initial exposure to bodybuilding was not dieting. It was get big and jacked, eat a lot and overeat. And then we got to experience what it's like to be really full and probably carrying too much body weight, but in service of getting huge. And then we do our first show, and all of a sudden we get to the other end of the spectrum. And what you typically see, not always, but often, especially in natural bodybuilders who are men, is that their off-season weights tend to decrease over time, even though their stage weight might go up slightly and then eventually plateau. So for example, I dieted down from 215 pounds to the high 170s in my first season, and then I dieted down from 210 pounds to about 180 and leaner in 2009, and then I dieted down from 200 in 2011 down to a similar place, and then this last time in 2019 I dieted from 195 down to a similar place, a little leaner, So slowly gaining muscle, but basically getting more and more comfortable with the off-season process and figuring out how to regulate that. And I want to really importantly point out that I competed 07, 09, 2011, and 2019. And I think it would have been, I'm not going to say disastrous, but much harder to have repaired my relationship with food if I had to turn the boat around and get right back into a prep each one of those times. Because there's that lagging time course before you even get back to physiologically normal. And the psychology side of it can take, that's pretty damn individual, you know? So, Andrea, like, I think your story is actually more similar, and it might be helpful for this person to hear about.
Yeah. Okay. So I was an athlete of some sort since I was about 6 years old. Gymnastics, cheer, whatever. I was always super active. Resistance trained by default as a base in cheerleading, aka I picked up my friends, not weights, but they, weighed quite a bit. So I was jerking. That sounds terrible. I was gonna say I was jerking my friends, but it's true. But it's true. Explosively
pressing your friends overhead. Yeah.
So, I mean, although I didn't do structure so I really got into bodybuilding, and then very quickly, within a year of lifting, I saw a little bit of changes, and I was like, this is fun. I'm going to diet. So I also lost, very similarly to this individual, 30 pounds my first prep very quickly. And I want to say the next year and a half of my life was spent. So I went from probably 135, 140 pounds down to 115-ish. And then did everything in my power and pretty much had to live like a prep in order to not get above 128 or 130, because that's not what a bodybuilder does, because I'm a figure athlete now and this is how I look now, and I'm not supposed to lose it. I can lose it a little, but not back to where I was, because I'm above that now. But again, looking back, it was like a 3-year prep, essentially. I did not change my life because I couldn't accept looking any much different than that. I had to look impressive all the time. And then, you bet your ass I tried to compete the next year, but ended up moving. I graduated from grad school or whatever. So I was like, okay, well, the next year I definitely will. Oh my God, just kidding. I did do the next year. I did 2012, moved, whatever, and then met Berto, and we did 2013 together. Yeah. And, I left him in a position that I know you guys see all the time. I talked to Berto about it. I know Jeff, we've talked about this on a podcast recently, that actually the podcast that comes out tomorrow, where I was more determined than ever, looked pretty decent, but when I met Berto, I was eating 1,400 calories a day and doing cardio 4 days a week. So, not only was I living like a prep when I wasn't in prep, but now I'm trying to do this again to #fix myself. Because prep is, at least if I'm in prep, it can justify my crazy life. These behaviors that I feel superior doing and look superior doing. But now I've pretty much shot myself in the foot for getting any better, because I'm trying to diet again while I'm already basically too dieted and basically doing too much activity. So, 2013 I did okay.
Were you feeling hungry after that first prep? When you're in your off season, were you hungry, or were you just I'm hungry, but this is what I do and I don't care?
I don't think I registered hunger anymore, because I was in a mental state of this is how I live. I am above all of you who have hunger problems, because I don't get hungry, because I eat every 3 hours and it's weighed out and I know exactly what it is and it's in my plan. I'm not an emotional eater, but when I'm in that certain mental state, which was literally 3 years straight, I don't remember ever being hungry or full. I eat because this is the way I eat to look the way I look, and that's it.
You're disassociated from your body signals. You
entirely.
Were eating per plan.
Yes. Yeah. What I can say though is, after season, when I finally was like, oh, we're going to take an off season, and Brandon and I went on the arcade, I was like, oh shit, I can eat a lot. Like, because all my meals were always so small or whatever. Or it was 3 giant ones of like fake food. So, yeah. And the only way, and don't get me wrong, like Berto, we did great. That was, what's funny is after my prep with Berto, looked pretty similar, maybe like 3% better because I came on with such a wet blanket of a metabolism. But then, still I was eating like probably on average like 300 calories a day more with Berto's guidance than on my own, because I thought that's how I had to do it, But anyways, after that, I think it took 2.5 years to be normal again. And to be honest, that's one of the reasons not because of just joy, because I enjoy what I'm doing now, but I don't know if I'm scared by how easy those 3 years were for me, I guess is what it is. So.
So you're not sure you're going to commit back to getting on stage because of that potential, the time frame and the way you did it before, and and getting back to baseline it was hard. There was a lot of depression related to that and struggle.
Yeah, and I didn't know it at the time, but I think more now it's a combination of that, like how crazy I got, but also, as y'all know, I have a blast with other activities that seem to bring me more joy right now. But
sure.
I'll leave it there for now. But yeah, I definitely had that experience, and it took years to get out of it. It involved hell of education, lots of education, a lot of guidance with Berto, a lot of guidance with my boyfriend, who's a competitor who handles competing much better than I do, and finding joy outside of my physique.
Yep. No, that's such an incredibly common experience, and I think, I don't want the person who asked this question or others who are experiencing similar things to think, oh shit, it's going to take me 2.5 years. But I think one of the benefits of having other perspective is it can help you reframe in such a way that you might not have done it on your own. So we can talk about some of the suggestions I would make based on the physiology and what we know of the psychology of doing it the way bodybuilders have traditionally done it, and what might be better for your specific problem. And then we can also talk about the way to frame and carry out your relationship with food that will allow you to get back to a normal-ish baseline for someone who's still competing. And I think those will all be helpful. And then we can also talk about some other things that impact your experience of hunger and satiety. So first off, since we know it can take sometimes nearly as long as the prep itself for all of your signals get back to normal, I think it's really important that you don't compete every year. This is also important for anyone who's drug-free if they want to improve noticeably on stage, is that if it takes time to recover and get back to a point where your physiology is at baseline, that means you're not going to have successful physiology to put on a lot of muscle mass and make improvements either until that happens. So you have a very limited window of time to actually improve your physique. So it's a nice way to ensure next time you get on stage there's a visual improvement and also time for your body to get back to baseline. So that's the physiological side of it primarily, but some of the behavioral things that go along with it, like Andrea said, even though she did put on, I want to say 15-ish pounds, you got like 10% over stage weight, which is kind of like the low end of what we recommend. Maybe you could have been a little heavier for sure, but it wasn't just the body weight. It was also that you were living like you were in prep still. Your behavior was the same. Yeah. So some of the things that we must do in order to get into shape require us to go against every signal our body's telling us, fatigue, opening yourself up to injury, poorer immune system, worse sleep, libido going away, all of the things that we associate with dieting. Those are our body preparing for famine. This is a status of low energy availability. There's a mismatch between what you need to maintain normal functioning in all of your physiological processes and the total energy output and the total energy input. So what does your body do? It starts shutting down and minimizing anything it can get away with, quote unquote. So things like reproductive function, et cetera, et cetera. And that feels crappy, and your body's telling you eat. So in this theoretical evolutionary position of famine, when food does come around, we don't mess around. We get that food and feed it to the tribe. So things we can do, or things we must do to get into shape, are tracking macros, having limits, having rules, having food lists, traditionally cutting out different categories of foods, and making sure we see scale weight change on a regular basis and changes in the way our physique looks. Even doing everything right, like having a flexible quote unquote approach to dieting, having a variable calorie intake based on your energy, rate of weight loss, increasing calories sometimes, decreasing at other times, having ranges for the macronutrients, or maybe just tracking protein and calories, not having limits on what foods you can eat, but fitting foods to numbers so it gives you more flexibility. Even doing things like rating your hunger levels and making sure they're not too high at the wrong stage of prep, like you shouldn't be suffering at the 4-week mark. Eventually, you're going to have to be in a position where all your body wants to do is eat. And a lot of these strategies that we talk about aren't just about safeguarding mental health. They're also about preserving enough willpower to get insanely shredded, which means that in some ways, it's just as hard when you do everything right. It's just that what you put in gives you more in the output. So it's raising the potential of using a more, I would say, archaic traditional bodybuilding approach. You might put in just as much effort, but get 5 pounds over shredded, versus what we're talking about. You don't suffer as much in the beginning and you get 5 pounds more shredded. So in the end, you're going to feel like crap no matter if you do it #evidence-based or not. You need that recovery period.
Yeah. Can I bring about another weird case study comparison thingy real quick?
Do you mind if I just finish my point, or is it an addendum to?
No, it was a delay in Skype. Thought you were done, but sorry. You were just frozen for a second. You go ahead and finish it.
No, he had to catch his breath.
I was just going off.
He was going on, yeah. So you let the man roll.
All right, sorry. All right, so you do everything right. It's still going to be brutally hard because you got shredded. Great job. You probably placed very well. Super motivated. First step is take an extended off season. But like the mistake that many of us make is if you take that extended off season but are still tracking and controlling everything in a similar way with just higher numbers than prep, that doesn't necessarily let all of your behaviors get back to normal. So one of the things that we really recommend, and if you can check out some of the work that I've done with Steve Taylor, both our Sustainable Fat Loss Free course on the Vault, and also Transitioning Away from Tracking, our paid course, and some of the videos we've done on this as well on our YouTube channel that are free. One of the things that ideally you get back to in the off season is getting back to using your internal guidance systems, hunger and satiety. And I know what you're thinking. You said, hey, I can't trust my internal guidance signals. If I listen to hunger, it'll just make me eat a lot. And that may be true initially. But most of the time when people explain that they can't do it, they basically also then can't commit to doing it to learn that skill. And I think it is a skill. Compounding on top of that, there are some things going on in the world right now that can be making it harder to get a true gauge of satiety. If you are locked in your home or on lockdown or doing the hashtag stay at home and your activity levels have greatly dropped, there is a really strong relationship between activity and hunger regulation. So if you are sedentary and not at least reaching what we would consider like a moderate activity level based on traditional health organization guidelines, then you're going to have a poorer ability to regulate appetite and hunger. So make sure you're getting your step count in. I would say trying to hit maybe 7K a day is a decent guideline for most people on average. This would look like an office worker getting in 2 20 to 30 minute walks a day and then still training regularly. And then definitely eat as much as you need to feel satiated, but also start being more mindful when you eat. Don't do other things while you eat. Don't rush through your food. Take your time chewing and pay attention to how you feel. Think about how hungry you are prior to eating and how full you feel during the meal and afterwards. And then primarily eat single item food ingredients, whole foods, lean proteins, and have a set meal schedule. So you have basically structure to your day and primarily whole foods, and you're reasonably active. But then you modulate your portion size based on how hungry or how satiated you feel. And then that becomes kind of the vehicle of where we get to eventually in the off season And then we're just doing like sports supportive nutritional habits. And if the goal is to gain weight, gaining weight at an appropriate rate, checking it semi-regularly. But that's really the only external cue we're using. Primarily, it is this internally cue-guided system. But it does take time. I think that's a really important piece to what Andrea was saying. And yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Andrea. What's the other case study stuff you think would be helpful?
Well, it wasn't.
I was going to say, that's a lot. Like, I'm just sitting here, I'm learning as I'm listening to you as well, but I'm like, that's a lot to take in. And so you factor in, okay, if that's a lot to take in now, to apply that, yeah, it's going to take time to, like, in a sense, like you said, you're setting up a new structure. So it takes time to kind of let that process unfold, and you'll get better with over time, the more you follow it. But I think the trust factor, like trusting yourself to let go of control and go into that's a big step right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Giving yourself permission just to try to eat normally, even if it does result. I think one thing is remind yourself, you have the grit and the willpower to lose 30 pounds in 16 weeks. Like for someone your size, dropping 2 pounds a week, that's hardcore. You know, that's a big deficit. That's a really fast rate to lose that. I would prefer you to lose that over 30 to 40 weeks. And I think know that if you've got that ability, don't let fear and feeling like you're not a part of the bodybuilding community, like Andrea said, don't let your identity get in the way of that trust. Like Jeff said, allow yourself to gain that weight if that happens, and find where that homeostasis might be as you learn these skills, and then know that you can always drop it again, you know?
Yeah. I guess it's literally all of what you just said combined is like, when I say it took 2.5 years, it's because there was a point 2.5 years later after that prep that I found #CrossFit, and I was having a lot of fun. And then I wasn't scared to eat anymore because I was having so much fun and lifting so much, and I was so hungry all the time. I figured out what hungry was. But it's not, I don't think it's that it took 2 years to make that transition. It's that it took me 2 years to, again, find joy that would allow me to be in a position to listen to myself, because I just wanted to perform so well. So it wasn't a figure of time. When that did finally hit 2 years later, I did get up to 150 pounds, and I didn't look too awesome, but I also was in a place in my brain that I didn't care too much. And that place was just, it took that long to find. But now I can say that I very much get full all the time. Like, but what I wanted to compare that to though is like, now that it's been, so like 2015, it's been like 5 years now where I haven't restricted my eating at all. And my weight hasn't fluctuated too much. But Jeff said at the top of this, and I know we're spending a lot of time on this question, but it's like a huge one that we've all said it was common, but like, it's
like the problem the competitors have.
It really is. Jeff, you said that you still, if you allowed yourself to eat, you think you'd be...
I think I'd keep gaining weight.
Do you think that's because you're so quick like because you just competed last year? Like, it's not always like that, is it?
Well, my problem is I say this every single time I'm done competing. I'm going to stick to my structure and just kind of like things slowly transition over to what we're supposed to do, like Eric mentioned about Steve's course and all that. But it's almost like I just let go. It's like, oh shit, okay, 3 Oreos here, 3 Oreos there. So there's no structure. I'm just kind of just going in there and eating. And it's not because I'm hungry. It's almost like okay, now I have the handcuffs off. Like, okay, prep's over, screw it. I can do what I want now. Well, for someone like me with my personality, it's so easy just to eat through emotion and without awareness. So I could go in the cupboard and grab 3 Oreos, 3 or 4 times a day. Well, I mean, you count that up, that's a lot of extra calories there. So for me, it's like, I just like a bottomless pit. I can just eat and eat and eat. So for me, like right now, I don't feel, like physically I can say that I'm probably full, but it's more mental than anything. Like I'm sitting there eating a meal, I'll do what Eric says. I have my meat, I have like a starch, a vegetable, and then, oh, there's some Doritos. Let me eat some Doritos. So it's not that I need the Oreos to make me full. It's more just like it's there and I can do it. So it's, for me personally, it's more of a mental thing than it is a physical thing.
And I'm not going to say this is the underlying reason for that, but when I've worked with a lot of people and thought about it myself, if you kind of follow that, what is that mental piece that's driving me to eat more Oreos or things like that, or that I just keep eating these foods. It's almost like when you've had these repeated exposures to restriction, competing year after year after year after year, you feel like, well, if I don't have these Doritos now, or if I don't have these Oreos now, if I don't take advantage of the fact that I can do what I want, then I'm going to be missing out, because a time will come, because it was just there not too long ago, where I won't have that freedom. So some of the things that I've advised to my clients who are struggling with post-contest binge eating is when they feel that kind of need, or they find themselves gravitating towards eating the foods that they're allowed to, or more than they're allowed to, just remind themselves the food's going to be there tomorrow. And you're in charge. The fact that you're allowed to eat Oreos, when you really, really take that home and you don't think about it, I'm only allowed to right now. Like, I could choose to not compete in the sport. I could choose to gain weight. I could choose to, like, the fact that you're actually in power and you're not going to restrict yourself, that often removes the drive to eat even more. Knowing that you do have unconditional permission, instead of bouncing back between restrictive structure and nothing, because one is a part of your body, or a part of your brain, I should say, rebelling against the other part of you that's trying to rein it in. And I think that itch never quite gets scratched until you can truly understand emotionally that they're like like you could always get Doritos, and that's okay, and then you can finally get to a place of, well, do I want the Doritos? And the answer is only yes if you feel like you can't have them, which is kind of like that part of you that's responding to the other part. So I think that's some of the that inner examination that has worked, at least in my experience with athletes.
Anything to add to that, Jeff?
I'm still going to eat some Oreos, but maybe not a whole box.
Well, for the listener, we'll move on. I think we're close to a cap on this, but there's some things that might help. Like Eric mentioned earlier, we have 2 courses that our dietitian has done along with Eric's help. Also, transition away from tracking and sustainable fat loss, which really can help, I think, anyone, especially right now with where they are and the emotional connection with your food. Maybe breaking that connection a little more, all things like that. Also, when Eric talked about structure, we have the default diet is a pretty popular blog post that he wrote on our blog. Because where else would you write a blog post? That was dumb. And we have a couple of podcasts too, transition away from tracking and sustainable fat loss, that kind of came out when those vault courses released. So check all that out.
And then we also have some of the eating behaviors of bodybuilding with Amanda Rizzo, as well as Steve, when we recorded back when we were at your place. That's a good one. Yeah. Okay. We got a few. And our recovery diet one, that's actually another thing. What you do in the immediate phase post-contest, if you kind of drag that out, like the weight regain and trying to be really controlled in that period where the desire to be unrestrained is the strongest, the more you fight that, the more time that fight will last, in my experience. True. If you take 10 months to only gain 10 pounds and you had to be really, really in control, versus gaining 10 pounds in 3 weeks, you may be at the same point at the end of that 3 weeks that you are at the 10 months, to be honest, the way you feel about food, which is unfortunate, but it's been my experience.
Yeah, it's 10 months and not living your best life. I mean, I did 2 years of that. Man.
Yeah.
It just sucks because, like, sometimes you have to, at the end of the day, sometimes you have to not look the way you want to look for a little bit. And that's not fun, but
yeah,
it helped me eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most important things for me was separating my self-worth, self-identity, and what the things that I saw as cool about me, or the things that made me valuable or lovable or appealing, from what I do in sport. I think, and this goes for anything. Like right now, I'm, hopefully going to hit a 500-pound squat one day. That's really not that objectively impressive for a 93-kilo lifter. I mean, it's definitely awesome. But like if you look at it outside of the context of, do I get to go to Worlds and then compete in the top 10? then yeah, it's fantastic. And it's way more than I first squatted. And I think being able to have that perspective is really important. Likewise, realizing that there's nothing wrong with me being at 19 or 20% body fat as a male, as long as I'm healthy and happy. And yes, I look amazing when I'm shredded, but that doesn't mean that I'm amazing or that that's better. And I think this is something that all competitors struggle with. It's like, oh, my identity as a bodybuilder, I'm part of this tribe. This is where I get acceptance and acknowledgement, also diminishes when I'm not in stage shape. So I got to compete every year. I got to show up. I got to be on stage. I got to do well. So I've tried to look at my 1RMs, my numbers, and my physique as these cool stretches that I can make my body and my mind do, and be like, that's awesome, I did that. And that the real thing I'm excited about and that I feel empowerment from is my ability to push myself and follow through with those goals and achieve them, not the goal themselves, if that makes sense. Yeah. Because that tells me something about me. That tells me something about my abilities, rather than just objectifying the outcomes of what my drive can get me. And that's where you get in trouble, because then to have value, you have to be in that. You've got to be really, really strong as a powerlifter, or you've got to be looking really, really amazing all the time. So hopefully that helps.
That's kind of me right now. Like I don't really care that I'm 28, 30 pounds over stage weight. It doesn't bother me. Whereas in 2014, coming off of that season, I had it in my head that, okay, I'm, my mid 40s. I need to be 10, 12 pounds over stage weight. So I made it a point to try to stay that lean, but it wasn't a good quality of life. Like I was food focused, hungry all the time. My performance wasn't all that great. Recovery wasn't all that great. And I was like, okay, I just need to just allow myself to gain some weight. And when I did, of course, initially I was like, oh, this obviously doesn't look as good. So it did take me some time to accept that that's just how I operate. Like as far as quality of life, I feel better when I'm heavier overall. But it took me a while to get to that point. So now that's why, like, if I eat a couple Oreos, I'm not binging, but it's like I'm okay with it, because I'm like, I'm just like in the off season, the way, my family dynamic is and just the way I've been doing things, and I'm okay with it. And also in the back of my mind, I'm like, I know how to get lean again. If I really need to, I know how to get back there. So there's a little bit of confidence there. But yeah, I think that's something that I do with a lot of my athletes is I try to ensure that the quality of life is the emphasis versus the aesthetics or quote unquote what's considered optimal as far as how you approach bodybuilding in general. If I can blend two things at once, great. But, if it means, hey, I need to get this person to be a little more, quality of life is more like what we need to do, then that's what I encourage and try to do with athletes. And sometimes that can be a tough sell because you don't always get that initial buy-in. But when you do and you run with it, then they start to see the value in that quality of life.
I think I want to say one more thing. That was awesome, Jeff. I like that you shared kind of the push and pull that you're still experiencing now this late in the sport. This isn't something you do wrong or right or figure out or don't. There's no finish line to cross. I think so long as you stay in the sport and so long as you're a human who exists over time, you're going to have to renegotiate what this looks like. Like you can ask, like I'm in a really good place right now and I'm like, I'm doing it right. But if you were just to go back 4 months, I was struggling with the post-competition period and finding the baseline and being stressed by the fact that I had a strongman comp coming up where I need to be under 90 kilos, and thinking, oh, I'm too heavy compared to where I was. And I, like objectively, if you look at my prep and Jeff's prep on paper, the vast majority of things were done #optimal, #science, and with all of this stuff in mind already. It is better than it was. And, you make a deal when you do bodybuilding that you're going to struggle with certain things to do something that is worth it for you. And you may decide it's not worth it for you at some point, and that's 100% okay. You may not compete anymore. And sometimes you may be getting the short end of that stick on the deal, and sometimes you might be getting the long end. And the best you can do is keep renegotiating until it's worth it. You are willing to accept any compromises that you have to make, and hopefully you're getting a good deal.
Yeah. Good job, y'all. That was like 35 minutes of probably one of the more important questions we have answered on any Q&A. And if you need help, we coach this. So,
We do.
We do that for about a decade now.
What's going on, 3DMJers? Eric Helms here. Thanks for listening to our podcast. I just want to take a second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I put out with Greg Nuckols, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Dr. Eric Trexler. We cover the most up-to-date, peer-reviewed research in the world of strength and physique sport that's directly relevant to your practice as a coach or an athlete. We provide our reviews in written format, but also, since you enjoy our podcast, in audio roundtable reviews where we discuss the research in depth. Finally, we also do video concept reviews where we cover a broader topic in video format for your learning. For fitness professionals, you can take quizzes on MASS content and earn continuing education credits for most of the biggest certifying bodies in the fitness industry. If you want to sign up and get a subscription, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and click on the Products tab. Thanks for your time, and thanks for listening.
Okay, question 2. How to use... Oh, this is perfect for right now, since as we're recording this, it's the time of the Rona, and a lot of people are stuck at home. So, it's short and sweet. How to use resistance bands as an additional training tool in a home gym with minimal equipment, dumbbells, bench, or a pull-up bar. What exercises can you recommend using resistance bands? That was it. Those are the questions on that big old field that you could fill all the way out. He just decided I'm going to go with, hey, I got these bands. This was actually submitted to like a few weeks ago. So even before.
Nice.
Yeah.
Heffrey, what you think? I know you've been working with a lot of people with varied circumstances.
Resistance bands.
Yeah.
Basically, you could replicate any movement pattern with resistance bands.
Because they provide resistance?
They do. The first word in resistance bands is resistance. But I will say, like, it's not, how do you say it? Consistent resistance, because there's it's kind of dynamic. So you have to kind of change rep speed a little bit to keep that tension there. That's the big thing I noticed. So it kind of limits the explosiveness that you can use with bands. But what I've been doing with a lot of my athletes is just relying on Myo-reps and BFR. Because in my mind, I'm like, okay, straight sets isn't going to be too practical with a lot of these exercises. Like we're talking 30 plus reps, especially if we're doing leg movements. So to me, I'm like, instead of feeling like you're going to throw up for 3 or 4 or 5 sets of doing that, let's just cut it down to one activation set where you feel like you're gassing, and then we'll get some effective sets after that. So more or less, like people that are relegated to just resistance bands, dumbbells and things like that, that's kind of what I've been relying on. And giving them options, not just, hey, you have to do this exercise with a straight set or this exercise just Myo-reps. Like I give them the choice, allowing them to be flexible with it, as long as it's not overly taxing. Because obviously if you're doing Myo-reps on every single exercise, every single workout, eventually your fatigue is going to really be through the roof. So I've been just, basically giving some guidelines that they can follow. But that's kind of my go-tos as of late, especially now with the environment that we're in. And it's been case by case too, as far as individuals, like just trying to figure out exactly what they got. Resistance bands, dumbbells, body weight, whatever they have. And then it's like, okay, let me see if I can find something that's practical for their situation. And I'm sure Eric will add a bunch more to this. But yeah. My thought is resistance bands, you could do any movement. You can replicate any movement pattern.
Yeah, there are some differences. I totally agree with Jeff first. Second, there are some, you'll experience it as being annoying and difficult to gauge with resistance bands, and it requires like more constant attention. So if you think about certain exercises like a row or a lateral raise, it gets harder as you get to the completion of the rep. and a lateral raise as the weight gets further and further and further and from the fulcrum, like at the top of a lateral raise, it's really hard, but it's always really easy at the bottom. And you'll notice like, man, gauging RPE or repetitions in reserve on a lateral raise is really difficult. And you really have a lot of temptation to cheat because you start to fail like at the very top, but it feels the same at the bottom. So, well, I could do another one, but I could get it up 3/4 of the way and then lean back a little bit or use a little bit of hip momentum. Like, how do I know what my RPE is? And like with a cable row, for example, or a barbell row, the first third, you can always get it there, but it gets increasingly difficult as the bar approaches your body. So when you see people who are not great at gauging RPE or maintaining form, it is often on movements like that, where the resistance curve increases as you move through the range of motion concentrically. And bands do that for everything. They make everything like that. Right. So like if you loop bands around your shoulders and then under your feet and you try to do like banded squats, when you sit deep into the squat, it's a bodyweight squat because the band's slack. And then as you stand up, it gets harder and harder, If you do it on push-ups, same thing. It's a bodyweight push-up at the bottom and then it gives you a little resistance at the top. If you do it on rows, it's like an exaggerated version of what already happens on rows. And then it's really easy to like get thrown back into the eccentric and lose control. And it just feels wacky. And it lends itself towards kind of having like these rest pausey weird reps or changes in tempo throughout the reps. So it does take some feeling out. I find that most people, because the way this question was framed is I've got some basic stuff like a pull-up bar and some dumbbells and some stuff, but I also have bands. And I do think that's the best way to look at bands is to use them as like adjunct. So for example, I've got 90 kilos of weight, so I can do deadlifts, but because 90 kilos is like less than 40% of my 1RM, I don't just do just straight up deadlifts for reps because I don't feel like throwing up. So instead, I wrap the band around the bar and then put my foot through it so that at the bottom it's 90 kilos and at the top it's, I don't know, it feels like something like 130, 140 kilos or whatever. So it's like 200 pounds at the bottom, 300 pounds at the top, maybe. I'm guessing. Don't know. But the point is that the resistance curve is a little more like free weights, so it's not super weird. And you can add bands to other movements. It's kind of like a la West Side, and it'll feel less funky, and it gives you a little more options for loading. You can do this with dumbbells. Like if you do a dumbbell RDL, you just wrap the bands around the handle, put it underneath your feet, and then do dumbbell RDLs with it, because probably your dumbbells aren't going to be heavy enough to make an RDL hard. Probably grip would fail first, so you can strap up, bands around the handles, band under your feet. If you don't want to use combined band and dumbbell resistance, you can do them for certain pulling movements. So for example, like face pulls, lateral raises, you can do them for like rows and lat pull down simulations, or you can put them underneath you and you can do assisted chin-ups. That's another way. So like if you're getting really, really tired of always just doing chin-ups with your body weight, in this example, the person has a chin-up bar, you can do higher reps with chins, or you can weight yourself and do lower reps. So it does give you some ability to not only resist, but also assist certain movements. But yeah, I like bands for like supplementary movements if you have free weights, or for certain free weight movements that are not heavy enough to put you in the appropriate rep range. You can add them to the loaded movements to make them a little harder in certain ways.
First off, great answers, y'all, but I want more. In the beginning of this, Jeff said, oh yeah, but we also do a lot of like Myo-reps and BFR. We went through that. Can we go a little into both of those, since I know all three coaches have said that? We start us off
Jeff,
with how you
want to do
prescribe
Myo-reps
BFR,
and I'll do BFR?
You want me to be the science guy?
Well, just explain what Myo-reps are and how someone does them.
or how do you prescribe them? Like when you said,
You don't need to talk about
So just sort of as a practical sense, the way I prescribe them is just like one activation set. So in general, like any exercise where you're going to get over 15 reps, that's where I'm prescribing them. Anything under that, I mean, once you do your activation set, you're really going to get like 2 reps, 3 reps after that. So basically the first set, anything 15 plus, take it to failure or close to it, 1 or 2 short of it, and then 3 to 5 deep breaths. And that's going to be in the neighborhood of like, let's say 10 to 20 second rest time. And then basically you jump into the next set. and you're going to take that to failure, but you're only going to get maybe a third to maybe one half of what you did in the first set. And then you just rinse and repeat that for like 3 to 5 mini sets. So it's one activation set, 3 to 5 mini sets. And the way to progress that would be there's many ways to do that. If you have enough load to do it, okay, the next time around, add a little bit to the activation set and continue on from there. Or you can do 2 activation sets, like do 1 activation set, do a normal rest period, 1 to 3 minutes or whatever, then do another high rep set, then do your mini sets after that with the 3 to 5 deep breaths. Or you could even tack on more mini sets, so 4 to 6 instead of 3 to 5. So there's different ways to progressively overload it. But Eric can probably dive deeper into the concepts behind it. Basically, what you're doing is you're cutting out a lot of the fluffy reps with those mini sets, and you're basically tapping in type 1, type 2 right away. So you're getting effective reps rather, right from the get-go. So that's basically kind of the concept.
So it's like 30 reps, 10 to 20 seconds, 15 reps, 10 to 20 seconds, 9 reps, 10 to 20 seconds.
That's probably...
Nah, it's going to be more like, let's say push-ups, for example. Let's say like for me, I can do maybe 20 to 25 incline push-ups.
Okay.
So let's say I get 20. My next set, I'm probably only going to get maybe 8, 9, maybe 10 reps. And that's it. Every one of those is going to feel like I'm dumbbell pressing like 100 pounds. It's going to feel heavy. And then after that, I'm probably get maybe similar numbers or maybe a little less than that on the next set.
Yeah.
One interesting thing, this is where women's mileage may vary differently than men. They tend to recover much better with short rest intervals. So, Andrew's experience of getting a whole lot, like her example might be more what she would experience. So you might have to cut your rest pauses pretty short, like 2 breaths for women, so you don't get a whole lot of those reps back. But essentially what we're doing here is we're trying to take limited load and make it as effective at achieving muscle activation and a training effect, a good stimulus, without having to do like gut busting number of reps, So for example, the research on rest pause, which is essentially what Myo-reps are, shows similar hypertrophy to straight sets. But let's take an example. Jeff's saying, hey, if you can do more than 15 reps, there are certain movements, like if you did 3x20, 3x17, 3x15 on a movement where you fully rested 5 minutes between sets, each one of those is going to be an extremely taxing effort, cardiovascularly and mentally. I can tell you, having just done my leg day, I do a clean with 90 kilos, and then I do front squats. I did 15, 14, 13 my last time. And it was really not fun, like trying to keep the rack position, trying to breathe with a bar in my neck. It's worse than the back squats. But if I did back squats, I'd be having to do like 30 rep sets. It is technically not so light that it would hurt me. Like my high bar max is 200 kilos. So it is less. It's more than, it's like 40% or a little more than 40% of my 1RM. So I could do 3 sets to failure with back squats with 90 kilos and get just as good of a hypertrophy response as going heavy. But that sounds awful, and the whole rest of the workout would be crushed.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but if let's say for this example, if I did front squat rest pause, the total amount of work done would be less. The cardiorespiratory fatigue would be less, but let's say I did that set of 15. I'm huffing and puffing and huffing and puffing, but I only get 5 huffs and puffs. Then I do it again, and then my quads are still sore, still fatigued. This local muscular endurance is now the limiting factor as I regain my cardiovascular fitness, hopefully, if I'm in decent shape. And I could get a similar effect doing 15, 6, 5, 4, maybe to doing what I did 15, 14, 13. And maybe that's what I'll do next training session. Thank you, Jeff. But yeah, I do think this actually works better on movements that aren't super, super full body, because you will still be carrying cardio fatigue unless you're in fantastic shape into those, if you're doing really high reps with moderately heavy load, even though because you're strong on the movement. But yeah, the idea here is that you're still in a state of local fatigue in the muscle, so you're going to get high threshold motor unit recruitment, like Jeff said, tapping into those type 2 fibers that normally reserve for heavy lifting or when you hit failure, because you're almost already at failure because you have incomplete recovery. So yeah, and then still getting sufficient volume because you're resting a little bit. So it's making their less fluff volume more effective volume, and data would show one primer set plus 3 drops is about equivalent to 3 extended sets where you're going to failure.
So one might argue, why not just do that on all my exercises?
Because then you're required to go to
everything?
failure.
Oh man, you'd be crushed. Like you could probably get away with it, maybe 1 or 2 workouts, maybe 3, but then after that, your recovery is going to be in the tubes.
It's like comparing.
Not for everybody, but for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's like, A is better than B, but we'd rather do C, right? So like I'd rather do, like if my options are 15, 14, 13 with 40% of 1 RM and getting, near failure and feeling fucking crushed on each set or something like that, versus 15, 6, 5, 4 with 20 seconds between. Yeah, the second one is better because there's less total fatigue, but both of them are a bunch of near failure sets. We'd rather put more weight on the bar and do 3x8. However, we can't because we're in lockdown. So it's kind of like, to answer your question, Andrea, this is making the best of a bad situation. We're optimizing within the constraints we have. And another way to do that is BFR, blood flow restriction training.
Good segue.
Thank you. Which basically is a similar concept, except you're making that fatigue linger and stick around by preventing metabolites from getting removed from the local area as quickly as they would normally. So it's sometimes called occlusion training. The literature has stepped away from that and used blood flow restriction because occlusion gives the perspective that it's like a tourniquet and you're preventing blood from getting in or out, but that's not the case. We are creating a level of blood flow restriction with a moderate sized band, something that's at least 1 inch thick or wider. Typically you're using knee wraps, long wrist wraps, an ace bandage, or one of those medical tourniquets for the arms only that are still like about 1 inch thick. And you're wrapping to a perceived 7 out of 10 tightness. You only wrap in 2 locations on the body, at the top of the shoulder, just underneath the armpit, and at the top of the hip at the groin. Again, it should be a 7 out of 10 tightness, not a hashtag 11 out of 10 tightness. It should be uncomfortable, but not painful. There should be no tingling. You shouldn't see purpling in the limb, and there shouldn't be like tissue damage under where the wrap was if you're doing it appropriately tight. And then much like a Myo-rep set or rest pause, you do an activation set. So you do 1 set to failure or close to it with a light load. You can go as light as 20% of 1 RM, and this is just as effective for hypertrophy as heavier loads like 80% of 1 RM. You will probably get somewhere between 30 to 40 reps. It will immediately cut down your total ability to do reps because you are preventing blood from getting out at the same rate as it normally would. So it's coming in and pooling, and metabolites are hanging around. Fatigue accumulates faster. High threshold motor units are recruited, and therefore you can induce hypertrophy with lower loads. So you might get 30 to 40 reps in that first set, and then you rest 30 to 60 seconds, do it again. You'll probably drop down to 15 to 20, do it again, and you basically you get 1 set that's around 30 to 40, and then 3 sets that are between 10 to 20, and that's if you're using around 20 to 30% of 1 RM for most people. You can just do it without worrying about the percentage of 1 RM. If it's something like Jeff said that you can get more than 15 reps on or more than 20 reps on, just do 4 sets or 3 to 4 sets near to failure, resting 30 to 60 seconds between, and then take the cuffs off afterward, and you'll have a very similar effect. We've got data on that.
I was just going to say, so we're leaving the cuffs on the entire time, correct?
Correct.
Could you use your resistance band?
And there is data suggesting you could take them off, but I don't think it make a huge difference. If it's super, super, super painful and uncomfortable and you need to take them off between, that's fine. But there's no harm that's going to come from, if you're not wrapping too tight, keeping it on for all 4 sets. And using a resistance band, so long as it's fat, is probably fine, and it's wrapped to a 7 out of 10, but you wouldn't want to use resistance tubing because that would be like a tourniquet.
Cool. Just trying to...
Ace bandages work great. By the way.
Ace bandage.
Just the stretchy, wide, pink colored bandages. Those are great.
So you're talking like a couple inches or thicker would be nice.
Yeah. For the arms, you can get away with like a inch and a half thickness. They actually do have BFR wraps that you can buy, which are basically just like longer wrist straps with a plastic buckle on them with the label BFR bands. They cost like $15.
So what are the movements, would you say, for lower body that would?
Oh yeah, that's actually a great question. Thank you, Jeff. So you might be thinking, okay, well, if this is at my hip and at my shoulders and my heart is in my chest, that means it's primarily going to be creating that blood pooling effect in my limbs. So I can do this for my quads. I can do this for my hams. I can do calf raises with it at my hip as well, not around the knee because you'll compress the nerve in your leg. I could do calves. You could do forearms if you really wanted to do that. However, there was actually a study on bench press where they wrapped it with the arms. They did bench. It created early fatigue in the triceps, and they actually saw pretty effective hypertrophy in the pecs. So it'll change the relative contribution of different muscles in a compound movement, because the ones that are restricted will get fatigue earlier in the set. So you can do push-ups with it as a way to drop the reps down, but for the most part, it's used for like leg extension, leg curl, calf raise, bicep curl, tricep push down.
What about the glutes?
Yeah, if you've seen some of my videos of me training, I will wrap my hip and then do hip thrusts. And because you get a little bit of contribution in any hip extension from the hamstring, and you also get a little bit of, if you watch someone actually do a hip thrust, there is some movement about the knee as well. There's some knee extension. You'll get some quads. So if you make the quads and the hamstrings fatigue earlier, you'll get a little more glutes. So if you do hip thrust just body weight, like I was getting 15 to 25 reps when I BFR'd my hip, and I also had a abduction band around my knees, like one of those circular fabrics that stretches that you can like do like monster walks with. Yeah. So you put a band around your knees, then push your knees up out against it. That's going to also activate your glute in other ways, create an abduction moment, so that you're trying to get the glutes going in that way while also doing the hip thrusts, and your quads and hams are failing. Yeah. I'll be impressed if you can get more than 20, 25 reps with banded BFR bodyweight hip thrusts.
Nice. Can I ask, just to wrap it up, y'all said a lot of this was like in the context of at home and making do with what we have now. Again, now because coronavirus or whatever. But these tools we've used when life was normal. So like when before these times and after these times, and if you have a full home gym or whatever, when would these tools be really useful regardless of just a home gym scenario kind of thing?
Like for me, I would only use like mainly on isolation type movements, like Myo-reps, like arm movements, maybe calves, laterals. But I wouldn't do them on like bigger movements, like, pressing, rowing, squatting, deadlifting, like none of that. Because that would basically just crush you. That would be just too demanding.
Right. But like a few minutes ago, Eric was talking about like, well, if I could just do like 3 sets of 8, that'd be best. Like if you have access to 3x8, why would you choose to use these instead? That's what answer I'm looking for.
Oh, you're not trying to argue with me. You're trying to get me to say smart things.
Yeah, I would be like, okay, so why have these tools in my toolbox?
You're an amazing Watson to our Sherlock. So exactly what Jeff said, like doing Myo-reps on big compound movements, especially for the lower body, it's that activation set really, really fatigues you. And then you're doing those mini sets while you're still potentially, in most cases, under cardio fatigue. And we don't really want that cardio fatigue. We just want that local fatigue. So it works a lot better on movements that don't create that big cardio hit, like curls, push downs, things like that, where it's all local. But again, we can't do 3x8. So that's how you'd use Myo-reps outside of the gym. Outside of Corona, is on stuff that won't create a big recovery sink. Because if you do 1 set to failure and then 3 mini sets to failure on a movement that's compound, hitting a lot of muscle groups, you're probably going to induce more muscle damage and inhibit your ability to perform sufficient volume and create an adequate or optimal stimulus over the week than if you'd stopped a little shy of failure and did like 3x8 on bench or squat or deadlift, etc. Same thing, but slightly different application with BFR. BFR on something like a squat, you can do it, and there's studies on it. but you are doing that first set near to failure, resting short, and then doing 3 more sets. And it's not better than normal. It's something you can do. Like the utility for BFR is you can use light loads and get a similar stimulus. And light loads are really helpful for people when they have joint pain at heavier loads. So the primary out of coronavirus utility of Myo-reps is a time-efficient way of completing movements that don't create a lot of global fatigue. And the outside of coronavirus utility for BFR is I get joint pain with heavy loads. And this is a way to keep or even gain muscle without pissing off my tendons or joints.
Especially like in prep when you're really lean.
Yeah.
And you're more vulnerable.
When you actually have to go to work and you're pressed for time or things of that
Another
nature.
really good use of Myo-reps is you thought the gym closed at 6 p.m., but it's Sunday. You look up and it closed at 5 p.m. You have 3 more sets to do in only 2 minutes. And you're like, that's okay. I can get all done right now.
Yeah.
I've done that before our meetings. Oh shit, our meeting's in 10 minutes. I got to crank these out. Yeah, let's do Myo-reps.
There you go. Okay. Thanks, guys.
That's also a good segue to our powerlifter question.
I was going to say that. How did you know?
You're all over it.
How did you know? Could you see what I was reading? Okay.
I just know how your brain works.
What was our last question entry, but now has moved up because it's frenzies with the question we just asked. So I'm a power lifter. I know you guys generally give advice for bodybuilders, and that's possible to make physique progress without gym access. Again, in the times of the Rona, we've talked about this a lot. But if I'm a power laughter, I don't know what that is, but I think it's also
you lift heavy and laugh.
That's
very
this.
hearty.
Like that, yeah.
Squat.
So when you're Santa Claus is what it would sound like.
Powerlifter.
But if I'm a powerlifter with my long-term goal of increasing my 1RM, what are ways I can make progress without a barbell while I'm stuck at home? Because he's in that same scenario. If I have bands and I have some toys, but I don't have the powerlifter actual needs, how can I best, continue and be in the best position when all this is over?
Yeah, I think straight up, I'm confident that someone could actually grow in the Rona. They might have like a few muscle groups that are hard to train to make them grow. Like you'd have to maybe get a partner to hold your feet down while you do a back extension off the edge of the couch or something like that, or grab a long table and do reverse hypers if you want to hit your extensors. But you could do it, so long as you're not getting more than like 40 reps on reverse hypers or hypers, you could grow your erectors even in the Rona if you're only caring about hypertrophy. But if you care about increasing your 1RM barbell, squat, bench, and deadlift, and all you have is bands and dumbbells, the frank reality is that you're probably going to have your 1RMs go down during this period.
Truth bomb. No.
Truth bomb. I'm sorry. I can't be optimistic to the point of lying. So, however, two scenarios. One power lifter says, shit, I can't do these movements. That's what I care about. I'm going to sit on my ass and play Counter-Strike. I just showed my age there. I'm not even sure that's a game people still play. Modern Warfare, whatever you kids play. You play video games for 3 months. The other one trains like a bodybuilder, as we described with all of this equipment. Person B, who got their bodybuilder on, I would say would have a much faster return to their old strength levels and possibly have increased the ceiling of where their strength could go, because they might have grown doing new movements and new ways and doing rows and pull downs and stuff that their body's not used to. If you look at some of the research on what discriminates between totals among elite level powerlifters, Olympic lifters, and strongmen in terms of what determines whether someone will have a higher 1RM than someone else, at the highest level, when all else is equal, it's muscle thickness, lean body mass, or cross-sectional area. So bigger muscles allow you to potentially be stronger. So think of it as a forced periodization. If you look at traditional periodization models, you start with a general prep and you go towards more specific prep. And the general prep is higher reps, less specific exercises, focusing on muscular endurance, work capacity, and hypertrophy. And then you take that material that you built, that work capacity that you built, and you quote unquote convert it into strength. There are, of course, a lot of assumptions in that model, but it seems generally true that linearity tends to help you peak strength. So look at this as, I'm going to just be in a very, very general prep phase for a while now. And this kind of actually goes with what's happened during the coronavirus. There's not any meets going on in most places in May or June. Most of them have been postponed to as late as November, September, October, or 2021. So now's not the time to be doing. Then I should say now's not the time to be doing. Now's not the perfect time to be doing heavy squats, bench, and deadlifts because there's no competition on the horizon at all. So kind of look at this as making the best of a not ideal situation because there's not just a on or off switch here. There's options of how well you can return to your sport when you come back.
I'm not a powerlifting coach or specialist by any stretch of the imagination, but the first thing that kind of jumps out of my mind is, okay, this powerlifter that can't train with these heavy loading, what's going to happen with their connective tissue? Like, are they like, if they're, let's say they're feeling beat up and things like that, then that might be might be a blessing in disguise for a lot of them to kind of heal up a little bit. You know, and if they're using blood flow restriction training, Myo-reps, things like that with light loading, they're building muscle. They're kind of, okay, great. Now you got more muscle and you're feeling really good coming out of this from that standpoint. So that's the kind of first thing that kind of jumped out in my mind.
Yeah.
This is the biggest taper and overshoot supercompensation you'll ever experience.
Exactly.
You're going to squat 1,000 pounds 1 week after the Rona's over.
But then I guess on the flip side,
just load it up and do it. Just try it.
So question, I guess in theory, let's say, because your connective tissue does adapt to that heavy loading, correct?
Yep.
See.
So I would say at the same time, going back into the regular training environment, like you have to kind of taper into it. Otherwise, you don't want to snap if you go too fast.
Yeah, actually, return to heavy lifting is actually something you need to be considerate of. And it's going to be movement specific because some of the highest amounts of compressive forces that bones are exposed to is not from just putting a heavy ass bar in your hands or your back. It's actually the muscles contracting because muscles are attached to either end of the bone. So when they shorten and pull really hard, sufficient to move a 300-pound bench or a 500-pound squat or a 600-pound deadlift or whatever, they're putting a lot of compressive force on that bone. So even doing bands and body weight and et cetera, you are going to be putting a fair amount of compressive force into those bones, especially if you can find movement variations where you don't have to do 30 reps. So for example, handstand push-ups, put your head on top of a pillow, put your feet over a door. You can find some heavy ways to press. Go look up some good videos on how to do a single arm push-up. That's going to put some pretty heavy load through similar musculature and a similar movement pattern to a bench press.
Dips
wouldn't be a bad time to, exactly. Dips or something you might even be able to figure out how to load, put a plate between your feet or hold some books or a backpack on your legs. There's some ways to do it. But yeah, I would definitely say when you do get back in the gym, I would start with just working up to a single couple times a week on each movement at like a 5 RPE and just start there, and then just build those singles up 5, 6, 7, 8 RPE over like a month or two. And then only then, if you start to plateau or if your lifts start to that's where they're at, then I would only start doing back offsets once you plateau. It's a good opportunity actually to figure out whether you were doing an unnecessary amount of volume to progress before. Maybe that's why you were so beat up going into the Rona and maybe why you got some good recovery out of it. It's an opportunity to kind of quote unquote reset and figure out how much do you really need to do to make good progress.
Yes, because that was one of my questions I got from my bodybuilder today. I was on Skype, and so I was like making a structure for his training now at home. But then his question was like, well, what if we're able to get back to our environment sooner than later? I'm like, well, hopefully that happens. So I'm like, okay, yeah, let's actually set that up. So I'm like thinking it from like trying to theorize it. I'm like, okay, we're going to be lifting, higher reps and, not that much loading. So if you get back in the gym, I was like, it's not a good idea just to shift your approach from this to now that. Like that can cause injury in my mind if you're not doing it right. So I basically just tapered him. Like, okay,
Smart.
What he was doing prior, like, 3 or 4 sets per exercise or whatever. Like, hey, maybe that first we could get in there. Let's just do two sets because now you're going to be loading.
Yes.
So
absolutely, people should take a graded exposure. 100%.
So I think like generally, of course, we've talked a lot about isolation, all that stuff, and for bodybuilders it's useful, but a powerlifter should try to get compounds with as low reps as possible where they can, right? And then
if you can figure out how to do it. Yeah. I mean, some body weight movements that are hard, chin-ups that you can load, single arm push-ups, handstand push-ups, weighted push-ups, incline weighted push-ups. You can figure out ways to get shit on you, whether that's, backpacks loaded with bags of rice,
Weighted vest
if you can afford it, if you can get access to it.
Yep.
It depends on the country you're in. Like right now, I actually can't get anything shipped to me except for groceries. Like I've actually got a tension rod pull-up bar in limbo somewhere from Amazon.
You probably need to order like 40 potatoes and put them in a bag.
Exactly. I need to order
sacks of potatoes and
I'm literally doing potato training.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So some of those movements are pretty good. Inverted rows are surprisingly hard. Most people are not getting 20 reps on those. I feel between 10 to 12 most of the time.
Yep.
And you can weight yourself on those too. Put some books in your lap while you do some inverted rows.
Word. What was I going to say? Oh, I think another thing I'd be worried about would be make sure even if you can't load a squat that you still are squatting. There's like a lot of flexibility issues I feel like you could lose. If you're a sumo squatter or
pistol squats are great. A lot of people think binarily, like I can't stand on one leg, sit on my ankle, and stand back up. I don't have the mobility or specific strength for that. Well, how about you just find the depth that you can do that to, do a heel lift if you need it, and then just create a single leg box squat. Those are surprisingly challenging. Then just work your way down, and that'll maintain your dorsiflexion and your hip flexibility, and it'll also be a pretty heavy squat pattern. If you can actually do a rock bottom pistol squat, like I can do that, and I can only get like 6 reps per leg. I have to wear Olympic lifting shoes, by the way, to do that. But the point is it's a 6 rep squat.
Don't sleep on the single leg
Don't sleep
stuff.
on the pistols.
One other consideration that comes to mind is would you recommend maybe as a power lifter, right? All the compressive load bearing, should there maybe be more like isometric core strength since they're not going to be getting that, and they usually do get that with a heavy barbell?
I think if they end up doing a lot of body weight movements, like the amount of control that you'll need in your body, like trying to do a single arm push up or dips, or like pistol squats, like you'll be surprised how much you get that connection and like rigidity in your body if you were trying to work on those.
Okay. In my head, I'm like, what's this way compression? What's the fancy word for it? Loading.
Axial loading.
There you go. Yeah. Okay.
I was like, should they like carry axial loading?
2 chairs, farmer carries?
Have everyone in your household
just hold the mattress up.
Yeah, there you go.
Carry the couch for 1 minute at a time.
Oh my
in
gosh.
March.
When I flip my mattress, that thing makes me sweat. That thing is so heavy.
Man, when I put on a fitted sheet, I'm done. Why are they so hard?
You could do some plyometrics. That's another thing.
Ooh, explosives. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can do depth jumps. So like jumping from one height to a lower height to absorb that force. That's going to put a lot of compressive force through your body. You can jump as high as you can. Like if you took the bar off Ray Williams' back mid squat, the dude would definitely be able to dunk. That's a lot of force going up. It doesn't create quite the same adaptation. There was a study we reviewed in Mass showing that resistance training versus plyometrics, one builds more bone mass proximally and the other one more distally.
Oh, interesting.
But it's better than nothing, So it is definitely a little different doing a squat with a weighted bar on your back versus a landing absorbing force, So, but I would think between doing nothing or doing plyometrics and coming back to squats, plyometrics would probably prepare you more.
Yeah. Weighted vest, squat jumps. Depth
Build into those very slowly. Yeah, like
I was gonna say.
If you can drop jumps create a lot of muscle damage and put a lot of force through your joints. I would start like off of a tiny height and then not loaded first, you know?
Yes. Okay. I think we did a good job with at-home things. And by we, I mean y'all. Okay. 2 more. I think they're going to be pretty long. Do we want to go with the sciencier one? Or leave that? Yeah, let's do it. Let's get that one out. It's going to take a while. All right. If I mispronounce any of this or, jumble my words, no one can do anything.
You got this, Andrea.
Okay. No one can do anything.
Masters of Science. Right. Masters of Exercise Science.
But not reading. I don't know if you can get a master's in reading, but I don't have it. Okay. All right.
I have a master's in reading English as a second language.
All right. I'm not looking for a particular answer. This is me in asker voice. I'm not looking for a particular answer, but was really curious on your thoughts of whether or not cardio can improve strength and or hypertrophy. Assuming all the steps to reduce or eliminate the interference effect, so e.g. cardio done 24 hours apart from resistance training, what are your thoughts on whether or not the increased mitochondria density in the muscle fibers, increased capillarization, and increased stroke volume has a positive effect when paired with resistance training? Especially considering some of Krieger, it's always Krieger. Okay.
Krieger.
Especially considering some of Krieger and Schoenfeld's new research about the upper limits of volume, it seems like this should increase session work capacity through greater creatine phosphate and ATP resynthesis. Could this be useful for more advanced athletes, maybe even intermediates? Really just curious to hear some thoughts about it from some smart peeps. He means y'all.
No, I mean first, but it's all good.
High five for working in creatine phosphate. What did they say? Mitochondrial biogenesis, capillarization,
ATP resynthesis. I remember all these words.
Yeah,
I just don't remember
you did great.
The whole,
So there's anytime we make a bunch of logical connections, it's great. That's critical thinking. Hats off, applauding the listener. But it does, with each one of those logical connections, there's a potential for missing something, which makes the next logical step, therefore, built on a house of cards. And the only house of cards here that I think would collapse is looking at the higher volumes seen in studies by Schoenfeld and colleagues, also replicated, I think, recently by Barbosa. I might have that last name wrong, but there was a recent study also that found like 20 to 30 sets better than less. And there was also the one done in the folks on the Navy ship that was also really high volume. Now, here's the thing. There are these studies showing that as volume increases, so too does hypertrophy. And they are disconnected from some other studies. I'm thinking of the German volume training studies and then Ostrowski and then Hieselgrave, where more like 8 to 12 or 8 to 18 sets was typically where you saw the peak in hypertrophy. So we've got these studies where it's like 30 to 40 sets is optimal for hypertrophy, and we've got these studies that are like, hey, 10 to 20 at most is optimal for hypertrophy. Now, here is the missing link, though, is when you compare those studies to one another, you don't see greater absolute amounts of hypertrophy in the studies that show even higher. You see similar amounts of hypertrophy. Okay, so you see a graded dose response in either one. Like, let's say we take this study by Schoenfeld, you go from like 12 to 24 to 36 sets, and there's higher hypertrophy as you go up. It's not twice as high as a study that showed the peak at 18. And now the difference between these studies is that the ones that show really high volumes to be optimal for hypertrophy typically have lower rest periods and then require the people to train in a state of fatigue, meaning that the quality has been sacrificed for the quantity of volume they're doing. Rest periods are low, loads have to drop from set to set, reps drop off set to set, or both. Okay, but the absolute amount of hypertrophy coming out of these folks doing 40 sets per exercise is similar to the ones where they're peaking at 10 to 20 sets. What gives? Well, they're resting longer, and they're probably training closer to true muscular fatigue rather than like global cardio, I hate life fatigue that's happening in those high rep studies. So for the assumption to be true that we would benefit for hypertrophy training due to mitochondrial biogenesis and increased capillarization due to cardio, we would think that therefore the best way to train would be to do as much volume as possible and sacrificing quality for quantity. But that's not actually the case. If you rest longer, if you are performing higher quality reps, and you're actually getting close to true muscular failure, local fatigue in the muscle rather than global fatigue and central fatigue just from doing a crap ton of volume in a short window and making it really, really hard. Like typically they're doing full body 3 times a week, 2-minute rest intervals with compound lifts and training to failure with 40 sets. Like that's just a bloodbath, you know? So when you do that bloodbath, it's just as effective as doing a 4th number of sets, resting longer and pushing close to failure. That's actual muscular failure. So we don't have to do that scenario where you're doing 40 sets. And the reason why 40 sets was better than 30 and 20 is because you were in this state of inadequate rest. So if you set up the game to be suboptimal in the first place, yes, more junk volume is better than less junk volume, but it might be better to simply do a higher quality of volume so you don't have to do as much. And then all of a sudden, your cardiovascular conditioning is not the bottleneck to being able to do more volume. But yeah, if you're trying to use like a high density of work, almost like CrossFit style of resistance training to grow, then yeah, your work capacity might be the limiting factor because each one of those units of volume is fatiguing and not that high of quality. And maybe, yeah, if I just build up my work capacity so I can do 60 sets, I'd grow optimally. But why would you do that when in fact you could probably get away with 15 really high quality sets with adequate rest, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the answer to that question.
So you basically just described why I progress with the amount of volume that I progress with, basically, in a nutshell.
I would say it's even the reason why I progress the amount of volume I progress on too.
Yeah.
It's
so
just,
that's what I get a lot.
Yeah.
Like just for me personally, that's what I get a lot, like on the gram or whatever. Like, oh, you barely do any volume. Like it's so low. But I always argue my quality is really high.
Yeah.
Like every rep
You're
is
training
really clean.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going like, I'm never like leaving too many reps in the tank. So there's enough intensity there. The loading is sufficient. And I'm resting plenty in between my sets. And I'm also resting outside of the sessions, like making sure that I'm getting, days off. So my performance and quality is always pretty high. And that's what I try to
You're also not
teach people. Try to teach
You're not doing short rest intervals and you're not clocking 15 rep sets either, So each one of the sets you do means something. Where if you do, for example, in the Hahn study, they were doing sets with 60 to 70% of 1RM for multiple sets, So like that's high rep work. So like they're generating all this fatigue that is not specific to the muscle. Jeff, when you train, your muscle could not do more than 2 more reps in most cases,
Yeah. What about like as far as like injury potential? Like if you're doing all that volume, like what's the injury potential there in comparison to someone who's, let's say, doing lower volume? Or try to compare, let's say, a high level CrossFitter who's jacked and conditioned, like they're athletes. What's the injury rate with them versus, let's say, a high level bodybuilder that's, let's say, training with lower volume? Is there something there that or?
Yeah, we got data on that actually. So we have injury rates using the same criteria per 1,000 hours in powerlifters, strongmen, Highland Games, weightlifters, CrossFit competitors, and bodybuilders. Rock bottom of that range is bodybuilders. They typically at most are seeing 1 injury per 1,000 hours. Highest is Highland Games and strongmen with more like 5 to 8 injuries per 1,000 hours, and then somewhere in the like 3 to 5 range, CrossFit, powerlifting, and weightlifting are all about the same, which is interesting. I think a lot of people would expect CrossFit to be higher, but they're always looking at like the gym fail compilations of CrossFit or the terrible story they heard from that one box. They're not thinking of competent coaches and people doing it competitively with actually a program plan. The question is volume or intensity more likely to hurt you? That's a tough one. There is some data on this, and I've got some data in preparation that we've submitted but hasn't been peer reviewed yet, where something like 3/4 of injuries happen in training for powerlifters and about 1/4 of their injuries happen in competition. Now your first thought would be, so training is the more injurious condition. I don't actually think that's true. We need to really think about it. Powerlifters do 3 comps a year, but they train 3 times per week at least. So if 1/3 to 1/4 or even 10-15% of their injuries come in competition, that means that those heavy loads, may actually expose them to a higher injury risk. So there is some combination between volume and load that predisposes you to injury. I don't know where it lies. One thing we do know for sure, Jeff, is that when someone is in a fatigued state, they are less capable of maintaining the same motor pattern and dispersion of forces. And people who are in a fatigue state are more likely to get non-contact injuries and non-contact injuries in sport. We don't have good data on like fatigue and weight training, but I don't think it would be different. And in the gym, like I think about bodybuilding injuries, they don't always happen on like single rep sets or 1RM testing. Like I remember when I tore my hamstring, it was on my third set of 5 on deadlifts the day after I had done sprint intervals. So you could say that was under both acute and chronic fatigue. That's just random one anecdote, but I do see people get hurt doing high rep stuff when they're tired. It does definitely happen.
Well, and I think too, a lot of the CrossFit injuries are they're more susceptible to overuse injuries than a bodybuilder. You know,
and it's
like the nagging things that are just like
That's
like
kind of what I
like
was thinking.
snapping
Like
or
if this person's just looking for ways to do more and more and more volume because I think they're going to get more and more gains.
Also a
then
personality
it could
thing.
be like I can't say for sure, but it could be elevating the risk for injury, overuse injuries, and therefore, if you're injured, I mean that's what's going to derail most people's progress.
Yep.
Is when you can't train on a high level when you're injured.
And it's tough to know whether injuries are actually overuse injuries or they are altered proprioception and kinematics from being in a state of fatigue, making those reps not ideal. Mm-hmm. And a couple of them cause the injury, you know, and that wasn't like it could be both because there's an interesting relationship. There's like a U-shaped curve with injury and volume. So like athletes who are under training are more likely to get hurt because they're not as resilient. And athletes who are overtraining are more likely to get hurt because they're probably training in a state of fatigue. Another relationship, which is pretty common, is acute spikes in volume. So like if you were to go from like 10 sets per muscle group to 20 sets per muscle group within a single mesocycle, I'd be a little wary of that, like doubling your total amount of volume in the gym.
Going from the Rona to going ham in the gym. Huge.
Yeah, not a good idea.
Yeah.
But to get back to this person's question is like, is there any potential utility of cardio for enhancing gains? Maybe, but not because it therefore allows you to hit the volumes which we think are optimal. Because we've seen studies that say 40 plus sets are optimal. We've seen studies that say 9 to 12 or 8 to 12 are optimal. I think the first thing you want to do is make sure that the efficiency of those sets is high so you don't have to do 40 sets. Even if you are someone who is a quote-unquote high-volume responder, that would still be closer to, like, in my experience, 20, 25 sets, like if you're a Berto versus a Jeff. But the way that cardio could potentially be helpful is truly as, like, low-intensity active recovery. There is some data to show that if you actually keep it at a true, really low effort, like doing cycling for 20 minutes at 40% of VO2 max post-training, you might be a little more recovered for the next day. It's actually been shown to be equivalent to an ice bath as far as recovery.
I think also some people forget that if you're appropriately bodybuilding with like, and you progressively over time, whatever, like, and you're doing the hard sets you need to do, like, you can't breathe after a hard set. Like, it's essentially mini HIIT. If you're like powerlifters, sometimes they need a lot of rest, but I don't know. I feel like when I watch Berto train, he's pouring sweat. He can't breathe. You know, when y'all rack a heavy set of squats, like pouring sweat.
Yeah, the stronger you get too.
Yeah,
that's an interesting thing too. Like 80% times 10 is not the same, even though it's the same stimulus for two people. If one person has a 200-pound squat, like we'll take the same individual going from early stage intermediate to end of career, right? So an early stage intermediate, 80% of your 1RM on squats might be, let's say, 225 pounds, right? 2 plates. By the end of your career, now you shifted your squat up to 500 pounds. Let's say that's a generous but not unreasonable kind of thing. Actually, talking about me right now. Now that's putting 405 on the bar, right? So I'm the same person, and I'm trained in both cases, but the cardiovascular expenditure, and I maybe like a 10-pound difference in body weight, a reasonably negligible change in body weight, but there's an additional 180 pounds on the bar, and it's just physics. So the energy expenditure is like 180% doing a set of 10 with 225 versus a set of 10 with 405. And there's no way around that. So that means that the cardiovascular output, the oxygen demand of that is, every one of my sets now is 1.5 to 1.8 times the number of sets in terms of the cardiovascular requirements. So yeah, as you get stronger, you have to be able to accommodate that. So yeah.
Groovy. Do y'all think we did that question?
I feel like we did.
Cap on it? All right. Okay. Last one. Oh, shoot. This is a long podcast, y'all. Okay. One more question.
We got this.
We got it. Okay. Hard gaining. All right, here we go. The fact that someone's a hard gainer, aka a person who has a hard time building muscle mass even though they train and eat correctly, sleep enough, and have low stress levels, etc. So the fact that someone's a hard gainer might be explained by supposing that in order to build more muscle mass, they need more volume than their innate recovery ability allows them to recover from. If this is true, and it is also true that generally speaking, the more experience one has in the gym, the more volume they need in order to grow, then it can be further speculated that reaching one's ceiling is reaching a point where the volume needed to grow becomes higher than their innate ability to recover allows them to recover from. Do you want to make that an easier question for us to wrap our heads around, Eric, real quick before we answer it?
Yeah, and this is another one of those examples where the logic is sound, but it's based on a couple of assumptions. Assumption one was that, and also if there's there are many assumptions that are wrong if we stick with the use of the word volume, and if we change it to the word training stress, then I'm on board. So the first assumption is that hard gainers could grow just fine if they did more volume. That part may be true. That probably is something that related to a hard gainers. They might need to just do more to get the similar outcome. That's true in some preliminary data on resistance training, and definitely has been shown in endurance training. However, the assumption that the bottleneck is their ability to recover from it, we don't know that to be true, and I would actually doubt that. I don't think that we have any reason to believe that. The second assumption is that volume goes up with training age. Or the volume requirement. I think it does basically when you go from like late stage novice to early stage intermediate, like to go from newbie gains to gaining again, you have to do substantially more training stress. That's almost a universal finding I've found. Like the way to go from you're trained to, you've done pretty well now and you're actually progressing as a trained individual. It is finding some way to do more training stress, not always necessarily volume, but it often will at least include an increase in volume. But then it doesn't keep going up. Like I've actually decreased the total volume that Bryce has done. I haven't seen Jeff increase his volume since like 2008, maybe 2009. He made that initial bump, got away from HIIT, but it wasn't like, but he's actually done higher volume in his 20s. And I'll let him speak to that. My volume needs haven't increased since probably 2009 to progress. And I played with very high volumes. So the stress does go up, but then it kind of starts to really, that curve flattens a lot. What's required to keep growing.
Well, I mean, weight is involved in this whole volume equation. So like your weights are going to go up.
That's a good question. What do they mean by volume? If they're talking about volume load, then yes, volume does start to slowly increase because as you get stronger, like you could look at 10 sets at 80% of 1RM as the same volume, but if you look at the absolute number, when you go from 225 to 405, again, it's 80% more volume. But you can look at a number of sets, and you might be going from like 2 to 3 sets as a late stage novice to 3 to 5 sets per movement as an advanced. And yeah, it's gone up substantially. It's like a 50% increase in volume. However, it may never need to go up again, and you're getting stronger, So yeah, I think there's just some assumptions in there. The one thing that I would say is true is that a true hard gainer, at like the muscle physiology level, someone who doesn't grow from the same dose, their dose response curve is flattened, will benefit from doing more volume. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the limiting factor is your ability to recover from it. In fact, you will probably actually recover from it just fine. Some of the, we actually just covered a study of this in Mass that's due to come out, or it might have just come out, I can't remember. People who are more dominant in slow twitch fibers recover faster and don't fatigue as quickly, because that's kind of the nature of those fibers. But fast twitch fibers tend to have more growth potential. So you do more, but you can do more. And so you might inherently, as a hard gainer, be able to handle more volume that you might also therefore need to do. So that assumption, it might even be the opposite.
Yeah, and I think a thing that I know I've touched on in some of the podcasts with the coaches too is the coaches. Y'all are both coaches, but like I think I've had a podcast with Jeff about hard gainers where it's like the assumption that you're even a hard gainer in our coaching experience as 3DMJ is oftentimes, and you can speak more to this, Jeff, like you're not eating enough, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not sleep, you're doing too much activity, like all those kinds of things. Is that accurate, Jeff?
Well, I mean, everybody's human, right? So to say like we have everything in order at all times, 24/7 for a full year, 2 years straight, it's like, it's rare. You're going to find someone who's perfect with everything all the time. So that's, to me, like as a coach, like those are the boxes you got to check to make sure those things are in order: sleep, nutrition, et cetera, et cetera. And also too, you got to think about perception. Like a lot of people perceive they're hard gainers, and maybe their expectations aren't too realistic. Like maybe they think they need to be growing like me or like Alberto or like Eric or whatever. But the reality is that that's not, let's say, their genetic level. So sometimes you have to take that into consideration. And I've had conversation with people about that, with hard gainers, that they think they're hard gainers. In reality, they're actually making progress. It's just in their mind, it's not at the expectation level as someone they're looking up to.
Right. Who's been doing, usually it's like, oh, I don't look like I've, these people who've been lifting for 10 years and I've done this for 3 years. Why am I not?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
I did have one hard gainer, and Eric probably remembers this because I asked for his help. Like I threw everything at this guy. I threw the kitchen sink at him, and
how rude.
No progress whatsoever. And what I learned though is that about a year later, maybe, or a little longer, and I didn't have any contact with him after that for that full year. He came back and told me he had sleep apnea, and he showed me some pictures after, and he made progress.
Wow.
It's like, so he did have like something that was there that I really didn't know about it. And he basically said, hey man, this is not something that, you would have known or anything like that. He's like, I just basically, learned it and got, a breathing machine and all that. So when he sleeps, it's a lot better quality sleep, and it changed things. So a lot of those things that you talked about, like in his question, the guy made sure to say, hey, my sleep's in order, this is in order, this is in order, this is in order. But
hard
those
time
are the
building
things like
muscle mass. Yeah, train and eat correctly. That's also, again, an assumption.
Yeah.
Sleeping enough, low stress levels.
So that has to be in line, like more consistent than not. Like that has to be in line like 90% of the time. We're human. It's not always going to be perfect, but if we can strive for 90%, then yeah, you're probably going to see better progress regardless.
Yeah. I just remember in the 80s and 90s, you look at some of the old, not that old, but older publications, and this was like way before the boom of natural bodybuilding. And when people were pretty much just reading muscle magazines and their expectations were colored by the IFBB Pro ranks, there were publications where they talked about hard gainers all the time. And every time I met somebody, like, well, I'm a hard gainer, like they would self-identify as that. And I think that's exactly what Jeff is talking about, is expectations. You've got 80%, maybe not 80%, but you've got, like, if we look at the data, if you just take a random sample of people in a training population, if you look at endurance adaptations, a small percentage of them would be quote unquote low responders who do better who get a similar VO2 max response with doing more volume of cardiovascular training. I have no reason to believe there wouldn't be a similar genetic distribution for hypertrophy or strength. right? So if we accept that observation that maybe, 10% of people are inherently physiologically hard gainers, but sometime in the 80s and 90s, before people really thought about the fact that all these dudes are genetically gifted and on gear, something like 40-50% of people thought they were hard gainers. That tells us it's largely about expectations. So yeah, if you expect to be looking amazing and making huge progress and putting multiple inches on your biceps every time you run a training program that you get out of a magazine, and that only happens the first 2 times and it's half of what they told you, well, I must be a hard gainer because everyone's getting this. They wouldn't put out a magazine to 2 million people that is lying to them. No, that's all the magazines. That's exactly what happened. So, and we get the same thing now during social media. Like the whole reason the person has 50,000 or 500,000 followers or multiple titles is because they're an outlier. And yes, social media makes you think everyone's an outlier, but the reality is, and a great example is the USAPL classification system. Like a class 2 lifter is stronger than 75% of other power lifters, probably stronger than 99% of the people on the planet. But a class 2 lifter is someone who feels completely inadequate and even gets made fun of on Instagram, because that would be a 93 kilo lifter, for example, who can squat like 380 or something like that.
I mean, all you got to do is walk into a gold, like scroll through your IG feed and you feel inadequate, or like you're, everybody's so jacked, and then go to Golds and you'll be like, oh, there's like 3 jack dudes of these 50 that I'm looking at. Like, it's just
exactly
not how the world is. So the more to go back to his question, right? So is it possible, that you have to do, you're going to keep having to do more and more volume, but then you can't recover from it. So then you're just stuck. Like that's not real.
That's just inaccurate. No.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you were like in really, really poor shape, but some of the factors that would make someone a physiological hard gainer means that, yes, they may respond better to more volume, but they're probably inherently better at recovering from more volume. And it's not going to keep increasing that much. There'll be probably a required increase if you want to go from late stage novice to late stage intermediate. But from there, I have almost never observed that the ticket to get someone to make high level progress once they have crossed over to being an intermediate was just do more. It's more like figure out a way to optimize a lot of things, and then the needle moves. The needle doesn't jump again. But I have definitely seen the needle jump. Like you exhaust someone's newbie gains on a minimalistic approach, and then you substantially increase their volume and they make almost newbie-like gains again for a year. I've definitely seen that many, many times.
But that's not going to happen like every 5 years after that.
No, like that was for me when I went from a being stuck in a high 400s deadlift to then rapidly getting to a 550 deadlift. That was me doing a lot more work and just training as hard as I still do today, where I'm now slowly moving the needle, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Okay.
Thank you.
That was it. You're welcome. They're cross rate 1, 2. How many was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you for the, wow, an hour and a half on 5 questions. That's your money's worth, friends. Even though this is free, that's your time worth, friends.
Check out our Patreon.
Right, actually, if you want to support this podcast. No, thank you guys for your time. This is 150 episodes.
What?
Man. Jeff, how does that make you feel?
That's a lot of volume.
Hey!
I feel like I'm a high volume person now. That makes me feel really good.
You're a high volume podcaster.
Now everybody can't talk shit about me. That's really nice.
All right. Thank you guys so much. See you next time.
Hey guys, this is Coach Alberto Nunez. Thanks so much for listening to our show today. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. I wanted to take a moment to remind you guys that we have a giant video library of educational materials at 3dmjvault.com. The vault is a place where we have organized our best information, paired it up with some of our favorite resources, and shared with all of you guys in one online database. We have courses on contest prep, hypertrophy, posing, fat loss, postseason recovery, and a whole lot more. Most of it is free. Some of it is for purchase to help support this podcast, and we continue adding pieces of updated content to it every couple of months that members always have unlimited access to. Once again, that's 3dmjvault.com, and we really hope you like it.